what I'm going to do is I'm going to concentrate on those smaller organizations who they might have a few hundred donors and a few close-knit supporters and people that have really cared about the organization since they started. And I'm going to look at what sort of processes they might go through to grow their organization. And I'm going to use what seems to be quite a strange analogy. When I was a kid, I was lucky in some ways in that my dad was in the Air Force. And one of the things I got was I got taught to fly for free, and I learned how to fly gliders. And what's that got to do with fundraising? I'm going to show you. But when you're actually in a little glider, or any aircraft for that matter, one of the most dangerous times when you're flying is when you first take off or when you land. When you're up in the air, there's not that much danger. Obviously, you don't want to bump into anyone else. But other than that, it's the ground that's usually the danger. Now, when you're learning to fly, one of the most dangerous times is when you're taking off. Now, the glider that I learned in was a powered glider, which I know sounds like, well, isn't a powered glider an aeroplane? But it's slightly complicated, but no, this was a powered glider. And what would happen is if the engine failed on takeoff, I would have some different things that I had to do in that case of an emergency. If, when I first off the ground, in the first couple of 100 feet, my engine fails, I'd just put the aircraft back onto the runway and nothing would happen except I'd probably need to run to the toilet. I got past a certain zone, say up here, then I would have enough height to quickly come back and land on the runway the wrong way. And if I got even more height, so if I got really high, I would be able to fly around and do a little circuit, come back and land safely. So we call these zones, we've got the A zone, the C zone, where I'm coming back up here, the D zone going all the way around. So the zone that I'm missing here is this B zone. The B zone is often called the widow zone or the widower zone. It's where you're going to end up in real danger. Because if you're in this zone, you haven't got enough height to come back and land, but you've got too much height to put straight back on the runway. So it's also known as the pick a field. So you're basically going to try and crash land somewhere in advance. What has that got to do with fundraising? Well, think of different charities. So the really big charities like World Vision and Heart Foundation in Australia, these guys who are raising tens of millions of dollars, they're up here in the D zone. They can afford to do a bit of R&D, make some mistakes, have some experiments, and if it doesn't quite work out right, it's not going to cripple them. To some extent, our C zone charities can make the odd mistake, they can try different things, but overall they need to get most things right, but they're not entirely vulnerable. In the A zone, you're not really doing much, you're not really pushing it, so there's not a lot of risk into how things are going to pan out. So for many of the organizations who are talking about growing their fundraising, they're actually in the A zone. What you need to try and do is, if you're going to do proper fundraising, and we're talking here about massive strategic growth, so you might go from, say, $200,000 of fundraised income to $1 million over 2 or 3 years, or from $500,000 to $5 million or something like that over 5 years. That might be your plan. What you want to try and do is get through this B zone, the danger zone, as quickly and safely as possible. Now, when you're in the A zone, it's actually quite easy. I know it doesn't feel like that, but if you compare it to the amount of effort that needs to go into getting donations when you're a bit bigger, it's actually quite easy. And that's usually because you've got a close, what's often referred to as tribe. People who are really close to you and your organization, the founders and the founders' friends. And generally speaking, you go and ask them for some money, and if they've got it and it's spare, then they will actually support you to some extent. The problem is you're going to run out of these really close-knit people. So then you start asking their friends, so the friends of friends and so forth. And as you can imagine, as you go further and further from these really close people, it's harder, and you're having to spend more money because you're having to spend more effort asking more people to get, and overall you get a fewer of them on average respond. So you might get 80 or 90% of your friends support you, but their friends of friends you might be down to 30 or 40%. And then when we start going beyond that, it drops off really quickly. So to begin to really grow when I get larger, I'm going to have to ask lots of people. And asking people costs a lot of money. However you're going to do it, whether it's face-to-face or direct mail or online, whatever it's going to do, I'm going to have to pay for advertising in whatever media. And so that's going to cost me more and more money. As I actually grow, those people are further and further away from me, and they're more and more expensive to get, and quite often more expensive to retain. So when I'm down in my A zone, I've got lots of really close friends and it's quite easy. When I'm up to my C and D zone, I've got the economies of scale and I might have systems and processes and everything else like that, which will make things a bit easier. But when I'm going through this zone, it's really, really difficult. So what you need to know if you're thinking about growing is where these zones start and finish and what impact that's going to be on your organization. And unfortunately, however you look at it, getting through that zone is going to cost you a lot more money than you probably imagine. So going through this zone is going to be really hard. I'd find that if I spend $100,000 or $200,000, I'm going to probably make $100,000 or $200,000 back, but over maybe 18 months or 2 years. So the money's going to take a while to come back through. So it's a very, very difficult. It's going to hurt your cash flow. You're going to have this money coming in, but you can't spend it on services. It's got to go out on fundraising. And you just have to accept that that's the reality. This is an expensive process. To go from a small charity to a medium-sized charity, you have to go through a really difficult zone and it's expensive.